Hey, thank you so much for clicking on the video. Before we get started, there is a major shift coming to the channel come the beginnings of May, but fret not, I will be very active and streaming regularly on Twitch. So if you have not created an account yet and followed me over on my Twitch channel, that is DarkSpiderDavid for the username. So it's twitch.tv/DarkSpiderDavid. So if you can help out with that by checking out the channel, checking out past broadcasts that I've done, and seeing if you like what you see, hit the follow button. You won't regret it. See you then. You can say that in this game, Spidey finds himself caught in a landslide. No escape from reality. I like this shirt. I figured that I would plug it in somehow, especially since it does feature Spidey and then 2099 Spidey, who's actually a very important character in this game, which is going to be the last kinda sorta classic game I'm going to review from the Spider-Man games that came out in the mid to late 2000s. I believe this one is actually one of the last ones that did get released from developer Beenox, overlooked by Activision, not from Treyarch this time. And it was one of the last few to be kind of like these one-off sort of pieces that would enter the last gen of consoles before the rights were given over to Insomniac and they overlooked the overhaul of Spider-Man on PS4. And this is Spider-Man Edge of Time. This was actually the last game I had yet to play that was part of those games that I had missed out. Granted, you could still count Spider-Man PS1, Enter Electro, and all that stuff, but any of those other games I'm just going to stream from now on over on my Twitch channel. Link is in the description once more. This is going to be the last game I'm going to actually review in the formal classic manner, so let's get into it. So just like with Web of Shadows, went over to my local GameStop, tracked it down using their website, and I managed to find a used copy of Edge of Time for a reasonable price, tested it out, thankfully it worked, and now here I am after playing it to review that last version of Spider-Man coming over from Beenox that tells a very dual story of both Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2099 working together across two completely different times to prevent something incredibly dark and tragic happen to not only both Spider-Men but also the world around them as they know it. That's honestly as deep as I can get with the plot before avoiding spoilers, because one thing you really need to know with Spider-Man Edge of Time that I really respected, that it's a little bit different than what you expect out of a traditional Spider-Man game, is that it's a very compact story. Albeit, yes, it is a little bit of a very short story. This game only took me about 7 hours to beat, so if you're looking for that really good, fun game to kind of play over a weekend, I gotta be honest, I think I'm jumping the gun here, but Edge of Time is a perfect one if you're a huge Spider-Man fan, because it's only about 7 hours long, 8, maybe 9 if you want to do some of the collectible side on the stuff on the side, but doing just the main storyline, it all takes place on one moment in time, which is technically not true because it stretches across time, and they kind of touch upon those themes about paradoxes and what it means to change time and the effects it can have, and it does get complicated, but they managed to find a way to simplify it in Spidey terms, with 2099 explaining one level of it and then Amazing Spider-Man explaining the other. And that's what I really appreciate about this game, is how compact it is. It takes place on just one single moment of these two Spider-Man trying to save the day without getting over themselves or having to take on too much. And I'm not just talking about the Spider-Man in general. I'm also talking about the writers, the directors, and the people behind this game that were able to keep it kind of tight. Be like, hey, not everything needs to include a reference from every single comic arc that has ever been made. Let's just tackle this one compact story, telling it about 7 hours, get you in, get you out, and have you have a good time. And that's one thing that Edge of Time was really excellent at doing, is making sure that it was able to come from a really good place, because you can tell that everybody who made this game loves Spider-Man, loves Spider-Man, because sure, there are Easter eggs in the background about certain characters from Spider-Man mythology, but it's mostly about the dynamic and the relationship between these two Spider-Men, Amazing and 2099, working together to save the day. And you can tell that, of course, there's going to be clashes of egos going on, because one believes that there should only be one Spider-Man, so they're going to be at heads with each other. But over time, it's cool to realize, just as they are, why they're Spider-Man in the first place, why they had to bear this great power, and with it, the great responsibility. And if that wasn't enough to sell the fact that these people behind the game love Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2099, Peter Parker, Miguel O'Hara, Josh Keaton, Christopher Daniel Barnes. Holy shit. I gotta be honest, I didn't know that they were the voices behind this game, and man, was it needed after recently playing whiny Spider-Man in Ultimate Spider-Man. I'm sorry, but that's just how I feel. And then really pathetic and loser Spider-Man in Web of Shadows. Oh my god. Oh my god, what a palate cleanser it was to hear Josh Keaton as Amazing Spider-Man, bringing me back memories of some of the other Beenox games like Shattered Dimensions, and then more importantly, Spectacular Spider-Man, one of my favorite animated shows of all time. And then, of course, the classic Christopher Daniel Barnes as 2099 Spider-Man from the original 90s animated series. It was perfect. It was just instantly a work of pure imagination and wonder for me as a Spider-Man fan that I was on the verge. I don't want to say I was on the verge of tears, but I did have to kind of like pause the game after hearing some banter between the two that legit sounds like the things that two Spider-Men would say to each other, and they were able to hone that in so expertly well that I was actually quite bummed out to see the story wrap up in a mere 7 hours, because I would have loved to have had another game with these two in there somehow. If I had to nitpick a little, is that maybe at times they were butting heads a little too much to where I'm like, okay guys, come on. You need to start maturing a little bit. But before I can actually make that into a complaint, they did start to give the characters the development that they need in order to work together to be able to fix this whole chaos, this temporal chaos that is happening. And sure, the temporal chaos aspect of the story is a little bit on the over-the-top side, where, again, 2099 Spidey's trying to explain it all, and I'm just like, well, that's pure comic book mumbo-jumbo, and I'm glad that it's interpreted in a video game more than trying to make it seem very realistic. But it's, again, a very compact story. They don't overstay their welcome with the time paradox, with the villains, with the things that come out of it. They purely play it as both an homage to these two Spidey men and also to giving a really great Spidey experience, because we really needed that. We really needed that to overlook some of the over-the-top things, like some side characters that pop out of nowhere, or certain enemy types, or a particular boss that I'm like, okay, that thing is crazy. But I'm glad to see it be told in a video game fashion, more so than it would have been in either a show or a movie, and also overlook some other little discrepancies within the voice acting, because there's a particular celebrity in this game, and I was like, ooh, cool, he's going to be in the game. And then shortly, very shortly, I realized this was probably not a good idea, because it sounds like he's sleepwalking in the booth. Because, wow, okay, get him out of here, please. Oh, God. And also to kind of deliver my point across of what I was trying to say in the Web of Shadows review, where I said that game felt more like an early-gen game in the PS3 and 360 era, where some textures were looking rough and things like that, because they were going for a slightly more photorealistic approach to some of those characters like Mary Jane, Spidey, Luke Cage, etc. Here they did go for a much more animated look. I don't know, but there was something about Beenox's interpretation of these characters, both mask on and mask off, and how Spidey looks with the big eyes and the musculature, as well as 2099. There was something about the designs that I really liked, but I can appreciate for just being different, more so than my personal preference, and I was able to buy them a little bit more. Plus, it really helps that this was a later gen game. I believe this came out in 2011, so we were only 2 years away from ushering in the PS4 and Xbox One. So the technology was a little bit more updated. You got some in-game cutscenes that I thought looked just fine, and then you got some pre-rendered CGI cutscenes that looked really, really cool. And so the visual flair, as well as the design of some of the futuristic stuff, as well as the present day stuff, that melded really, really great. And also the soundtrack. You got great soundtrack, great music, sound effects, cool, all that stuff, really well put together. Although I have no idea what motivated the animators to give Spider-Man this run right here.
Look at this. Somebody come look at this. Look at this. Somebody come and look at this. Look at this.
The only thing that comes with the territory of making this a very short experience that is told in 7 hours and all in one night within our character's perspective is that this game is actually linear as opposed to what you'd usually expect out of a Spider-Man game, meaning that there's no sandbox whatsoever. So you don't get to explore New York City, you don't get to explore the, I think, Neo City or Neo, I can't remember what it was called, but the 2099 version of that New York City. Don't get to explore it. You can literally just gaze from afar within windows. That was as far as I can go when it comes to checking out the city. But apart from that, almost the entire game, in fact 90 to 95% of the game takes place indoors. So that was the only thing that I wish we could have changed, but at the same time I kind of understood it because of what they were trying to tell with the story. So the sandbox aspect that you would probably expect from a traditional Spidey game, completely gone. I will admit this did lead to a little issue I had, which is the web swinging. Generally, when you play as Spidey, you look forward to the web swinging. So when you take place the majority of the game indoors, that web swinging does get a little tedious. And it's a shame because from what I felt from the web swinging that I was able to do and the way they were programming it, it felt fine. It's just that I can't really go that much anywhere with the web swinging because it all takes place indoors. There's a few areas here and there along the map where there are these long corridors that kind of emphasize and kind of insinuate for you to web swing to get across there faster, especially when they put a little bit of a time limit and there's an impending danger coming. But eventually I would just hit a wall and I'm like, well, it's time to wall crawl or it's time to sprint, and the web swinging gets kind of lost in translation. And I was bummed out knowing that the game was going to be indoors because that was going to be inevitable. So a Spidey game that is taking away the NYC sandbox and the web swinging. That means that you better goddamn make sure that combat, those boss battles, and everything else that is very essential for a Spidey game has to be tight. And thankfully it was. It wasn't perfect, but it's definitely one of the more refined and polished action games that I've played Spidey with in quite some time, because you got great combos, great uses of the web. One thing that I really appreciated that I was glad that, because logically I would think to myself, this in any other game, especially a sandbox Spidey game, I would have appreciated the sense of thrill and danger and panic and risk of running out of web, because he has to refill his web shooters. But here you don't run out of web, so it makes the trade-off of not being able to explore the sandbox to replenish your web and all that stuff with the linearity of this game. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess you got to make it up for the combat, where you take on waves of enemies, whether they be human or robotic, because you are switching between 2099 Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man. And what's also cool is that they have different playstyles. So Amazing Spider-Man is a bit more bare knuckle, whereas Spidey 2099, he uses more so of his talons, the big giant Batman-looking things that he's got on his gauntlets. So you can definitely feel the difference in the playstyle. And so stringing together the combos and the webs, the heavy attacks on the triangle button, because I was playing on PS3, there was a significant difference between the two, and at the same time it was fun. It never felt tedious. I think a little bit towards the end, especially when they started to increase the number of enemies as opposed to the actual difficulty of them, I did feel it was getting a little button mashy. But coming in to save the day are upgrades as you gain these, I can't remember what they're called, but these orbs. It's kind of like the God of War orbs that you were to get in God of War, the little red orbs. You kind of get the blue version of that in this game, and that's where you trade in for upgrades in the upgrade tree. And it's cool that there's 3 separate trees, one for 2099, one for Amazing, and then one for shared, meaning both are going to get these abilities. So it's cool that I was able to strategize which one is which. I guess this is kind of like a matter of preference, but it really depends on who you are, because there's going to be some folks who could theoretically get through the game without upgrading too much, and others, like myself, will try to explore every nook and cranny to get as many orbs as possible, as many golden spiders as possible, that will increase some of the more main upgrades like the health and the regeneration. And it gives a little bit of replay value, being able to do some of those things, some of those collectibles on the side. But for me, I prioritize more so making sure my health is high and making sure that the strength on my button combos is better, rather than adding new combos to it. That was just my preference. But it's cool that play style with 2 different Spidey-Men are there for your particular preference. So it's cool that they were able to give that really good action third-person action experience. Although I'm gonna have to take a little bit of umbrage with some of these free-falling segments that would happen from time to time with Spider-Man 2099 that were getting a little tedious over time, and though I can't prove this, could probably be implemented into the game simply just to mask some hidden load times. So at this point, all you have to do to complete the experience is throw in some cool boss battles. There aren't as many as I was hoping them to be. In fact, now thinking back to it, I'm like, I think there were like 3 or 4. Granted, it is a much shorter experience, so maybe that's why I didn't think about that sort of thing until now. But I do wish that 1, maybe 2 other of those rogue gallery variants were thrown in, but I understand, again, because of the time that they were working with. And they do make you think. There was one that I did feel was a little button mashing, and there was another one where the boss in question was a little OP'd for who this person was. I was like, did they do something, or are they insinuating that this person's not who they say that they are and it's like a different version? I don't know. I might have to replay the game to kind of get a little bit of the context clues, but at least the experience is made worthwhile. And if you are a major completionist, unlike me, there are some side content such as those collectibles, those golden spiders, and then also these challenges. Now the challenges I completely forgoed because they're very time sensitive, very time rooted, whether it be complete a certain task at a certain time or gather a certain amount of orbs under a certain time limit and you'll receive medals depending on how well you do, or defeat a certain amount of waves of enemies on that certain time. I gotta be honest, those time things, I only do them as a last resort to be able to gain XP or those orbs so that I can get better at the main game. And you do have the option to go back and play these things once you're done with the main game. But once I was done, I was like, okay, I am done. Now at this point, I'm cool with just checking out the newspaper clippings that you gather as you complete chapters in the game, or those like little trophies and the little bios you can kind of read in the cinematics, a bunch of little post-game stuff that kind of adds a little bit to the value of the game. Frankly, I feel like this is probably my favorite out of the what I like to call the trinity of one-off Spidey games that came out in the mid-2000s. Web of Shadows, Shattered Dimensions, and Edge of Time. Even though this is the shortest, and it's very difficult to really dive deep into without getting into spoilers, because aside from the gameplay and the boss battles, there's some interesting little twists within the story that I was like, okay, now you got my attention. You had my curiosity. Now you got my attention. And again, the short experience is actually a little bit of a benefit here, because even though I was missing a little bit of that sandbox experience and web swinging, because that's always the best part about being Spider-Man, at least they were able to make it up on the action side as well as the little details, whether it be in the story or even in some of the background stuff, especially when they start to get a little nostalgic towards the end. And this could be my favorite one out of those 3 that I just mentioned, and that's surprising considering that from what I remember, I did enjoy Shattered Dimensions, but this one, again, I take a really great shorter experience from a video game, particularly a Spidey video game, rather than a very filled up and very expansive and large, but ultimately kind of experience from any other open sandbox game. Doesn't necessarily have to be Spider-Man, but quality over quantity is what I always say. And I gotta be honest, Edge of Time, they were able to prioritize the right stuff. So I'm gonna be giving Spider-Man Edge of Time a very solid 8 out of 10. I actually wouldn't mind replaying this, possibly on the stream later on. I tried to stream this and record some footage for this review at the same time, but I was facing technical issues. So if you guys want me to stream this game, not anytime soon, but possibly in the foreseeable future, let me know in the comments below. Also, if you have played Edge of Time, let me know in the comments what you guys think of the game. Make sure you hit the like and share button, as well as the links in the description below. Follow me on Instagram and on Twitter. DarkSpiderDavid is the username, all one word, no caps. But also, very importantly, make sure you follow me over on Twitch, because if you guys want to see that potential playthrough of Spider-Man Edge of Time on stream, as well as streams of other Spidey games, whether it be Spidey or Spider-Man from 2000, I think it was, the year 2000 on PS1, and Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, I have those games for the PlayStation 1. I'm going to be playing on PlayStation 2, but because that's the only way I can play them. But I am planning on playing those on stream, as well as potentially finally getting around to 100%ing and platinuming Spider-Man on PS4. Especially now, because we got brand new costumes from Spider-Man Far From Home and the Sam Raimi suit. I cannot wait to dive into those. So if you guys want to check out those streams coming up very soon, hit the link in the description below for my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/darkspiderdavid. Check it out and make sure to hit the follow button. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching this review as well as the other reviews I've been doing for the Spider-Man games. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it for the watch. Hopefully you guys will stick with me on my Twitch channel. Until next time, guys, I will see you all later.